Well, I just carried this beast downstairs. There's my spare. Cool thing about it is it has all the plugs. So the other one was missing a plug. So that's good. This thing is probably not worth saving anyway. Look at that speaker. It's just trashed. So this does have a good spider, but there's another complication. You see, there's very little of that original cone left to glue to, and I've already cut that gray cone. So I'm going to see what I can come up with. Maybe I will have to buy a cone that will glue to this. I am not going to remove this spider from this basket. I am going to take this basket off and mount it on that voice coil, or that field coil housing. So that's going to be the way I do this. I'm just going to build this whole assembly up without tearing into that spider. Alright guys, a little bit of a disappointment, but I'm not going to let that stop me. We always find a way. One idea I have is I'm going to take this original one that I started with and take an X-Acto knife and very carefully cut around this rim right here, around the former, cut it away from the former, and I'll pull this off and I'll use this as my coupling between this voice coil here and this speaker cone here. Before I do all that, I'll test this voice coil and make sure it's good, and I'll go ahead and get this basket off of here. I'm not going to remove the whole speaker housing. There's no point. I'll just remove the basket with the voice coil attached. I'm going to leave it attached. I'm not going to mess with that phenolic again. I've learned my lesson, guys. Alright, I didn't want to get any debris, especially since I'm not removing that voice coil from the gap in this thing. I didn't want to get any debris down in there, so I taped it pretty well. And I've drilled out these brackets from the spare, and I'm going to remove the basket now. In order to get this basket off, I need to get those two wires. Those lead from the output transformer to the voice coil. I need to determinate those two wires, and then I can unbolt this basket and lift it straight off. Well, I was able to get the schematic, and there she is. This I got off of Radio Museum. I'd like to mention something to you guys. Anybody that is serious about doing radios, in other words, if you do more than one or two radios here and there, you ought to join Radio Museum, because you can, as long as you upload occasionally, you can download just about as many as you want of whatever schemos and other things they have on there. It costs $25 to join, but once you've joined, as long as you keep uploading, you don't have to pay anymore. It's a great thing. I've been with them for about 4 years now, and there's very seldom is a radio that schematic that they don't have. This one is the Edison R-4, R-5, and C4, which is what this radio is. This is, I believe, an R-4. There is the power unit down there, and there is the receiver unit. And then also on Radio Museum was this nice drawing that shows where the parts are positioned. And I have the same thing for the receiver unit as well, and a bunch of other stuff. It was all on Radio Museum. Actually, it's been one of the best things I ever did since I got in the radio hobby, was to join Radio Museum. It's a German organization, and it's run very well. They run a tight ship, but you won't be sorry you joined if you do. All right, here's where I am right now. This is what they call the speaker input transformer. That is that. Okay, now I've numbered these wires, as you know, as I pulled them out of the terminal strip inside the chassis. Then I went ahead and put the corresponding numbers on the schematic. Now I'm going to do a DC resistance check across all these coils just to make sure that the windings in this thing are okay. I'm also going to check that voice coil out, because I determinated the voice coil here, and I can go ahead and measure it now. Okay, I'll go ahead and set my meter up on resistance. First thing I want to do is check the voice coil, which is terminals 1 and 2. Actually, I'll check those right here. Let's see what we have here. 1.164 kiloohms. Wow, that's pretty steep. It does not show on there what the voice coil should be, but I have 1.17K. Make sure I'm connected up good. Yep, 1.17K. All right, let me measure the corresponding location on the input transformer. See what I have here. 1.1 ohms. That's odd. That's not a very good impedance match. 1.1 ohms. 1.1K. Very strange. Okay. And I'll check the same thing on the transformer in the other one. Let me check this, the output winding of this, the secondary winding of this output transformer. I'll just tell you what it says. Alright, I get 1.8 ohms. So that's pretty close to what I measured on the other one. So that part is probably okay. It's this voice coil that worries me. I'm not able to get a consistent reading on this thing, so I'm wondering maybe there's a problem with it. Okay, I'm going to do one last check on the voice coil in the spare. So I'm getting consistently about 1.1K. So let me see something. I should see that move just a little bit when I move. I should see that little indicator right there move a little bit when I move this voice coil. Yep, there we go. Check it out. That's cool. So that I'm pretty sure that this voice coil has continuity, and that's all I'm worried about. If it has continuity, it's unlikely there's anything wrong with it. So what I'm going to do is use this entire speaker assembly. I don't see any reason to replace any parts, take it apart, or anything like that. I'll just clean it up and I'll swap it out for the other one, because that way I don't have to remove this basket. I don't have to mess with alignment on this voice coil at all. It's floating nicely. There's nothing wrong. It doesn't rub or anything. I'll put shims in it when I mount the speaker onto it. So I think that's the best approach for this particular situation. It's unfortunate that I damaged that spider, but the one broke so easily. I suspect it was cracked anyway. So let's get to work. I'm going to be exploring strange new worlds today because I've never done this before. What I'm about to try. So I did cut very carefully. I cut that old speaker cone away from the former for that voice coil, and you see right here is where the seam is for this, and I want to try and line this seam up with the seam that's on this one, which is right here. But what I am going to do is try and get some of this old glue off of here and peel back some of the paper so that I have something for the Eileen's tacky glue to absorb into, because that's how it works best. Alright, so I did it as much as I could. So let me go ahead and mix up. I've already got some Eileen's tacky glue from last time. Let me start working on it. So just kind of touch it on there. Be very careful not to get it down into the former, in that gap between the former and the iron core. Right, Larry? good side is I'll be able to see down on that former as I'm pressing this together. Okay, now I want to put a little bit of this glue on this guy. I've never done this before, man. This is feels kind of funky because I'm not sure it's going to work. And this radio doesn't belong to me, so if it doesn't work, I have to figure something else out. I can't put it on the shelf and walk away from it. All right, so let's get a little more glue on there now that we've gotten some sort of soaked in. This is going to be the glue, I think, that knits with the glue on the other piece, and we start to get a bond. Boy, this paper absorbs a lot. Okay, here goes. Now, once it starts to stick, I want to find some way to hold them together. And I may put little tiny pieces of coffee filter on there too. I just don't know yet. Well, now comes the really tedious stuff. So as you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm taking a little bit of glue and I'm just coating the joint of the two pieces of paper, you know, that of the former and of this little cone piece. And the idea is to get the glue to soak into the paper and begin to knit the two pieces together. So you just put light coatings on, and each time you put a coating on, you move out on the cone just a little bit more so it continues to absorb into the paper, and the glue will knit to itself some too, but you want it to always be soaking into the paper a little bit if you can. So you see I'll move a little further away from the center each time I put another coating on. So like I said, this is tedious work. You just keep working through it. It's this part's not a lot of fun, because if you hurry it, you can mess it up. And if you mess it up, then you either have to start all over or get a different speaker. So let's go ahead and finish this up, and then I'll show you the next stage. Okay, I'm going to let that cure for a while, and then I'm going to put some glue from the other side. And little by little, I'm going to work my way to making these two pieces one piece, and then I will go about mounting the gray speaker, the Zenith replacement speaker, onto it. It's a slow process, guys. It's going to take some time. I am just a little concerned about the gap that exists in some places around this where these things are attached. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of coffee filter and I'm going to kind of bridge that gap a little bit, and then that coffee filter will absorb a bunch of the glue, and it should bond pretty well with this stuff that's there. So you kind of get the coffee filter wet. I just tore a little piece. Always tear it, don't cut it. Always tear it. And like I've said before, the reason you tear it is because you want those little fibers to be sticking off out of the edges so that you can use those to kind of knit with what's already there. All right. Now, let's see if we can't wiggle it into a better position. There we go. Now Now you use your paintbrush to kind of tamp it down. And that will bridge that little gap. And we'll strengthen this bond, and then later I will go through with an X-Acto knife and trim off around the end where it hangs over the former like that. I don't think it would be a problem, but I might as well. And then you kind of, it's hard to see here, you kind of brush away from it with the brush, and that kind of stretches those fibers out and helps them to reach out and grab as much as they can. And see, I'm using the brush is a little bit stiff because it's like a nylon brush, and so it enables me to tamp this down into the gap here, and then that glue will be nice and strong. That'll be a nice strong little bond. I'll do a couple little pieces like that around this. I'll let it dry, and then I'll do a couple more. I want this to be strong, and it's okay for it to be rigid, fairly rigid, because this part is not supposed to flex much. This is the part of the speaker that transmits all of the energy to the rest of the speaker. Remember, you tamp it down in there. I hope you can see that. If you can't, well, there's a little gap. And what I'm doing is I'm tapping this filter down into that gap to strengthen it there. And the idea being that that will strengthen. There's a little place where it didn't press down very well against the original former, and I'm just trying to strengthen that up. Now when I trim this around the former, I'm going to work upside down. In other words, I'll turn the speaker upside down and I'll work from underneath so that any debris that falls does not fall into the gap here. And this is a particularly bad spot where I'm at right now. I definitely want to strengthen that up, but this will be as rigid as can be when I'm all done here. And there's a little tiny tear right here, so I'm going to help that out a little bit. So I'll need a little bit bigger piece, which is just fine. Every now and then you might get a little excited and get down inside that former. Try to keep that clean. It's unlikely the speaker will withdraw that far to where that becomes a problem, but I'm not willing to risk it, because once it dries, it's dry and it's there. So there's not much you can do about it at that point. You don't have to work too fast, but you don't want to dawdle either, because it does get sticky when it starts to dry, and it's harder to work with. Right there, that's where I'm talking about, right there. I want to tamp that down in there, and that'll strengthen that right up. The Aleene's glue will knit this material right with the original paper material, and will make it nice and strong. And it doesn't add much weight, because I'm not talking about putting a lot of glue on. I think I'll just go all the way around. This is working out real nice. That will make for a very strong connection between the original speaker former and this little partial cone. Almost there, guys. I think this is working out pretty well. My memory ran out of steam just before I finished recording the last video. It was okay because the video was getting a little bit long anyway. Actually, it was getting way too long. But here is that patch I was putting all the way around the perimeter of where the old speaker cone from one radio meets the former from another radio. And I'm kind of gluing them. I glued them together, and then I kind of put a reinforcing patch around it. I was only going to do a couple spots, and then I thought, no, I'll just go all the way around and make it nice and strong. It's okay if it's rigid, because this part is supposed to be rigid. All right, there's the back side of that little mini cone. And if you look real close, let me see if I can get you in there. It's bad video work, I know, guys. If you look real close, you can see that I could use a little bit of glue there too to reinforce what I've done, and then I should be finished with this. I'll be really careful here because I don't want that going down in the gap. But it shouldn't be too bad. It shouldn't be too hard to get it in there without causing problems. And then I'll be done with that. What I am doing is I trimmed the inside, the inner diameter of this cone, this replacement cone, so that it would nestle down a bit further in onto the old cone. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just screwing these retainers onto the cone without any glue. Right now what I want to do is get this replacement cone glued to the original cone, and then I want to get a coating of Eileen's tacky glue on the original cone so that it, because it's really rather delicate, it tears quite easily. At the transition between the two cones, there's likely to be sort of a stress point, but if it's been strengthened with some glue, then that stress point will be less prominent, and it'll be strong. The material itself will be stronger. I'm going to screw this down nice and tight so that this is where it should be when that is centered. And you see I have this old cone with the voice coil put in there with some centered with some shims. It is kind of fun though, doing something different that you don't get to do every day. It's challenging, and it's a little bit nerve-wracking because this radio was built 1929. I mean, we're talking almost 90 years ago. So it's pretty neat stuff, but it's also a little intimidating knowing that you're messing with something that old. You know, I can drop a tiny nut and it will find its way into one of these goofy holes here in this bench. You know, I don't know how it does it, but it's time after time after time they fall in that hole. And I want to plug the hole up. I just haven't gotten to it. I never get to a lot of things. But I'm slowly getting caught up on radio work, and so I will be getting to some things soon. I was going to take this whole weekend off. This is 4th of July weekend. I was going to take the whole weekend off and just kind of relax, but then the fella to whom I owe this radio reached out to me and said, hey, I'm done with the cabinet, so whenever you're done with the radio, that'd be good. So here I am. Oh, I see Buster has awakened. You know, cats, they sleep all day, and then when they do finally drag their happy butts off the chair that they're sleeping on, well, then they expect you to be there to serve them. And Buster is about the whiniest cat. He's a cool cat, and he's smart, but he is whiny. When our kids were growing up, we didn't put up with whining from the kids. And my wife wonders why I put up with whining from Buster. I haven't yet been able to give her a good answer. Okay, I'm going to go edit some video here shortly. But before I do, let me get some glue on this speaker and see if I can't get that the healing started on this thing. What I'm going to do is, you don't want to glue one side and have it dry while you're still working on the other side. So what I'm going to do is start working on it in a crisscross manner. You got to try and get the glue to soak into the paper to kind of get it started. And then, if you can, try to take the brush and get up under the paper a little bit. It's not so easy to do, because they fit tight, but that's good. That's what I want. Yeah, it fits pretty tight all the way around. Now what I'm going to wind up doing is putting some paper on here to strengthen it. I mentioned that I was going to put some Eileen's tacky glue on the whole thing. It will soak in, and that's all I'll do is just the one coat. But that will strengthen this paper. You kind of tamp out the air bubbles. You see the air bubble come out the end? You kind of work the air bubbles out to the ends. And that way you get the best adhesion and the best fit. Try to work wrinkles out. You're going to run across some, but try to work them out. You just work it while it's wet. You just work toward an end. Try to remember to do radial swipes with the brush away from the paper. So I guess I haven't been showing this, and here's what I do. I just take the paper and I just try to tear it in the general shape that I want. Okay. Then I get the glue and I get it pretty wet where I want to lay this down. Because if I try wetting the paper, it just sticks to my fingers and makes it a nightmare. So I just started doing it this way tonight. Usually I'd get the paper good and wet. Now I'll get one end of it wet just to get it started. Okay, but I can still handle it. Lay it down real quick. Start working it. You want right away start getting air bubbles out of this gap or this little overlay spot right here. Okay, try to get the air bubbles out of there because that's how you'll get the strength, is by this paper adhering and sort of knitting to it. Okay. Now, then you start wetting the paper from the top. It's already wet underneath. You maybe want to put a little more underneath just to give it something to cling to. It looks like I'm putting a lot of glue on, but I'm really not. First off, this glue is only about 1/3 glue, so it's 2/3 water. And I'm spreading it fairly, relatively thinly with a paintbrush. So it looks like a lot, but by the time it dries, it's really not, there's not that much there. And that's how glue should be. Make sure that the glue radiates away from the patch. So you stretch those fibers, and you want to give the fibers a way to cling to the old paper. Now, let me fill in these spots here. And the reason I did the crisscross thing is I don't want to distort the speaker by wetting one part of the speaker and the whole rest of the speaker is dry, and then having that side weaken a little bit and sort of warp the speaker. When it dries, it tightens up and not in the same way that it started. So that's what I'm trying to do. Time to leave that be. I'll come put another coat on it in a couple of hours, but for right now, it's looking pretty good. I think I'll leave it be. Let me go rinse out my brush and we'll call it good. Okie dokie, this thing has been sitting here all night, drying, and feels pretty dry. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the little shims, the centering shims, and see how we do. No, I'm not expecting it to be totally perfect. I might have to loosen these and recenter this cone. Let's just see. See, when I move it from behind, It seems to move without, very freely and without noise. It's a little stiff, but these speakers always are kind of stiff, these earlier speakers. I think this is going to be okay. It doesn't have a lot of up and down movement, but that may be just the way it is. This suspension is pretty good. It's not, the suspension here is not really limiting it. It's hard to do this evenly, so it's going to drag a little when I do this unevenly. But it seems to be pretty good. It has flexibility. The surround is moving. That's pretty good. I'm going to leave this be and set this up when the radio is done, and I think this is a success. It looks really good. Speaker looks nice and solid. It moves uniformly. You can see that that center old cone is moving nice and uniformly. There's no funkiness going on there. I think this is going to be okay. Well, I think I may have averted a tragedy here. So as it turns out, the spare speaker that I had did help me out, and I think this one is going to work out fine. If it does not work out fine, I do have a plan B, and that plan B involves a Grunau Majestic speaker that is a little bit smaller but has a deeper throw, and those Majestic speakers sound awesome, and I might be able to mount that in the place of this one. But I won't go to plan B unless this forces me to. I don't really know for sure how this is going to sound. We'll give this a try, and if it doesn't sound good enough, I know how this sort of radio should sound, and if it doesn't sound right, if it doesn't have enough bass or good frequency response, then we'll pull this speaker out and put that Grunau in, and we'll make the Grunau work. All right, guys, it's Thursday, July 6th of 2017. We're going to end this episode here, and we'll get back to it. We'll begin working on that power unit again. From Salt Lake City, your western outpost, this is Michael. That's all for now.